The summer I spent 3 weeks visiting farms in Holmes County, Ohio. I noticed something on about the fourth day that I could not explain. Every farmhouse I visited had the back door open. Screens on the windows, but the back door open. The way you leave a door open in summer when the kitchen gets hot and you need the cross ventilation. Flies should have been everywhere. In every kitchen, every food preparation area, every room with food present. There were almost none. I have a farmhouse in my own state. I keep my screens in good repair. I close my doors. I use a commercial fly spray when the problem gets bad in July and August. I still spend 3 months of every summer swatting flies in my kitchen. I asked a woman named Ruth Esh, whose farmhouse outside Berlin I had been visiting for 2 afternoons, why she did not have flies. She gave me an answer I did not expect. She said she had flies. She just did not have very many of them, and the ones she had did not come inside. She spent about an hour showing me what she does. By the end of that hour, I understood that I had been approaching the fly problem completely backward for my entire adult life. Before I show you what Ruth does, I want to tell you about a document I found in the National Agricultural Library that explains why the commercial fly control products most American households use produce the result most American households experience. Temporary reduction followed by the same population returning within a week or two. In 1914, the United States Public Health Service published a bulletin on domestic fly control titled Practical Methods for the Reduction of Fly Populations in Rural Households. The bulletin was authored by researchers who had spent 2 years studying fly behavior on farms in Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Ohio. It predated the commercial pesticide industry by several decades and was written at a moment when the knowledge motivating it was purely practical. Flies transmit typhoid, dysentery, and cholera, and reducing fly populations near homes was a public health priority before antibiotics made those diseases less immediately threatening. The bulletin's core finding was that chemical killing of adult flies produced no lasting population reduction because the adult flies visible in and around a structure represent only a small fraction of the total local population at any given moment. Killing the adults you can see does not address the larvae and pupae developing in the organic material, manure, rotting vegetation, food waste that the adults laid their eggs in. Within days of any chemical treatment, the emerging adults from that developmental population replenish what the treatment killed. The bulletin recommended a 3-part approach that does not appear in any commercial fly control product sold today because no single product can deliver all 3 parts, and a 3-part approach that costs essentially nothing does not support a commercial product line. Part 1. Eliminate breeding sites. Part 2. Trap and kill adults at attractant stations positioned away from the home. Part 3. Use physical and aromatic deterrents to keep adult flies away from areas where food is handled. This is exactly what Ruth Esh does. She did not read the 1914 bulletin. Her grandmother taught her, and her grandmother's grandmother taught her grandmother, in the same unbroken chain of practical knowledge that runs through every technique in this series. Here is what she does exactly, in the order she explained it to me. The first thing, and she was emphatic that this was the first thing, was the elimination of what she called the invitation. Every breeding site near a structure is an invitation. Flies lay eggs in manure, in rotting organic waste, in damp decomposing vegetation, in any warm, moist, nutrient-rich organic material they can find. The female housefly lays between 100 and 150 eggs per clutch, and up to 500 eggs over her lifetime, each clutch capable of producing adult flies within 10 to 14 days in warm summer conditions. A single breeding site, a pile of rotting kitchen scraps, a poorly managed manure pile, a clogged rain gutter filled with decomposing leaves, can produce hundreds of adult flies per week. Ruth composts her kitchen waste in a sealed bin positioned at the far corner of her property, as far from the house as practical, kept tightly covered at all times except when material is being added. The cover is not optional. An open compost bin is a fly nursery. A sealed bin with regular turning that heats to a temperature high enough to kill eggs and larvae is a different thing entirely. Her manure management follows the same principle. The barn is cleaned daily. The manure is moved to a pile that is turned regularly, which generates the internal heat that kills eggs and larvae before they complete development. A cold, stagnant manure pile sitting near the barn is a fly population factory. A hot, actively composting manure pile that has managed to reach internal temperatures above 140 degrees is not. She told me that her mother's standard for fly management was that if you have flies, look for what you are feeding them. Every fly problem has an organic material source somewhere within a few hundred feet of where the flies are concentrated. Find the source and address it, and the problem reduces on its own within 2 weeks. Leave the source in place and treat only the adult flies, and the problem returns within 3 days. This is the part the commercial fly control industry cannot sell you. Eliminating an open compost bin or improving manure management does not require purchasing anything. It requires changing a habit. The product that changes a habit does not exist. The second thing Ruth does is the bucket trap, and this is where she loses most English visitors who hear the first part and think she is simply describing good sanitation rather than pest control. The sanitation is necessary but not sufficient by itself because no farmhouse in rural Ohio can eliminate every organic material source within the range a fly can travel. The trapping layer addresses the ambient population that the source elimination did not prevent from developing. Her trap is simpler than anything sold commercially and more effective in her direct experience across 40 years of using it. A 5-gallon bucket with a tight-fitting lid. A 2.5-inch hole cut in the center of the lid. A cone of hardware cloth formed to fit in the hole with the narrow end pointing down into the bucket and the wide end flush with the top of the lid. The flies enter through the wide top of the cone, follow the narrowing funnel downward into the bucket, and cannot navigate back up through the narrowing cone to exit. This is the same one-way entry principle used in fish traps and lobster pots. Simple, effective, and not invented by Ruth or her grandmother. It appears in multiple agricultural extension bulletins from the 1890s and 1900s as a standard homestead fly management tool, before anyone sold a commercial fly trap with a patented attractant pouch. The bait inside the bucket is the part where Ruth's knowledge diverges most dramatically from commercial alternatives. Commercial fly traps typically use a proprietary attractant that the manufacturer claims is more effective than homemade alternatives. The active attractant compounds in most commercial fly bait, which the manufacturers do not prominently advertise, are protein fermentation byproducts, specifically the ammonia and sulfur compounds that develop when protein-rich organic material decomposes. Fish meal, blood meal, yeast, and similar materials produce these compounds as they break down. Ruth uses 3 eggs cracked into a cup of water with a tablespoon of raw apple cider vinegar and a tablespoon of sugar, mixed and poured into the bottom of the bucket. The eggs provide the protein that produces ammonia and sulfur compounds as they decompose in the summer heat. The vinegar provides acetic acid, a secondary attractant that specifically draws fruit flies and other small fly species the egg bait attracts less reliably. The sugar provides a carbohydrate attractant that broadens the species range the trap addresses. The total cost of this bait is approximately 30 cents. She replaces it every 2 weeks or when the bucket is visibly full of trapped flies. She places the bucket at the far end of her property from the house, not near any door or window. The bucket is an attractant. Positioned near the house, it draws flies toward the house. Positioned away from the house, it draws flies away from the house and kills them there. This is the placement principle the 1914 Public Health Service Bulletin described as critical to trap effectiveness, and it is the principle most people violate when they place a fly trap on their porch or near their back door. The third element is the inside deterrent, which is where the approach becomes specific in a way that commercial products cannot replicate at any price. Common houseflies navigate using their sense of smell. They locate food sources, breeding sites, and surfaces to land on through olfactory cues. Certain plant volatile compounds disrupt this navigation in a way that neither kills the fly nor repels it through fear, but interferes with its ability to identify the surface or area as a suitable target. Ruth keeps fresh basil plants on every windowsill in her kitchen and near every exterior door. Not dried basil, live potted basil. The volatile oils in living basil plants, particularly linalool and eugenol, are continuously released at the concentration that disrupts fly olfactory navigation. The moment you cut basil and dry it, the volatile oil concentration begins to decline. A fresh, actively growing basil plant in direct sunlight, releases deterrent compounds continuously throughout the growing season. She also keeps a small bunch of fresh lavender hanging near her kitchen door, replaced every 2 weeks when the volatile oil concentration drops below what she can smell from 12 inches. Her test is her own nose. If she can smell the lavender from arm's length, it is still active. When she cannot, she replaces it. Mint grown in pots near exterior doors and windows, specifically spearmint or peppermint rather than decorative mint varieties, provides a third volatile compound layer. Like basil, the effectiveness depends on living plants actively growing in sunlight, not cut sprigs or dried herbs. These three plant-based deterrents overlap in their compound profiles in a way that makes the combined effect broader than any single plant provides alone. Ruth has used this combination for 40 years and has never been able to identify which component matters most, because she has never removed any of them to test. She just knows that the back door has been open in July since her mother kept the same plants in the same windows, and the flies stay outside. I want to tell you about the commercial fly bait product that Ruth does not use and why, because understanding this helps explain the economics of the industry she is operating outside of. The commercial fly spray and bait products most commonly sold at hardware stores and farm supply centers in the United States use imidacloprid, spinosad, or methomyl as active killing ingredients. All three are effective. All three kill adult flies on contact or shortly after ingestion. All three have label warnings that include potential toxicity to beneficial insects, bees specifically, as well as restrictions on use near water, near pets, and near food preparation areas. The commercial market for fly control products in the United States generates approximately $800 million annually. The product categories include indoor baits, outdoor baits, fly strips, electronic zappers, commercial attractants, and professional-grade residual sprays. Ruth Esh's fly management system consists of a 5-gallon bucket that costs $4, a piece of hardware cloth that cost approximately 50 cents, 3 egg varieties of produce she would have bought anyway, fresh herbs she grows herself, and consistent organic waste management practices that cost nothing. Her system works better than commercial products by her own 40-year assessment and by the direct observation of anyone who visits her farmhouse in July. The flies are outside, the kitchen is open, there is no chemical smell, no sticky trap, no dead flies on a commercial paper strip coated with something she would prefer not to have near her food. The 1914 Public Health Service Bulletin described this multi-layer approach as the recommended standard for rural households in the United States, at a time when fly-borne disease was a leading cause of death. The bulletin was distributed through county health departments and the Extension Service network across the country. It described in detail the bucket trap, the baiting approach using common farm organic materials, the importance of breeding site elimination, and the use of aromatic plants as deterrents. None of this required purchasing anything from any company. All of it was knowledge any household could implement with materials they already had or could grow. The commercial fly control product market that developed over the following 5 decades built itself around the killing of adults approach specifically, because that is the approach that can be sold in a bottle. You cannot bottle sanitation practice. You cannot sell a basil plant as a proprietary fly deterrent. You cannot patent the one-way cone trap that the 1890s Extension Service bulletins described in public domain agricultural literature. What you can sell is a bottle that kills flies when you spray it. So that is what the industry sold, at scale, with significant marketing investment, until American households stopped thinking about fly control in terms of system management and started thinking about it in terms of which product to buy. Ruth Esh does not have a fly problem because her grandmother did not have a fly problem. And her grandmother's method was never disrupted by the transition to purchase products that the commercial industry spent the second half of the 20th century engineering. Now let me give you the complete practical protocol because the system I have described is more straightforward to implement than it might sound as a description. This week, walk the area around your home and identify organic waste sources, open compost containers, food waste near garbage cans, standing water with organic material, damp vegetation piles, any concentrated organic material within 200 feet of your main entry points. Address each one. Seal, remove, or move it. This is the foundation. Nothing else in this protocol is as important. This weekend, build the bucket trap. 5-gallon bucket from any hardware store, $4. Hardware cloth, the quarter-inch mesh type, available in small quantities at hardware stores for a few dollars. Cut a circle of hardware cloth to fit in the lid opening. Form it into a cone with the narrow end pointing down. Secure with a piece of wire around the perimeter. Cut a 2.5-inch hole in the center of the bucket lid using a hole saw or drill and jigsaw. Mount the cone in the hole. Mix 2 eggs with a cup of water and a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar and a tablespoon of sugar in a separate container. Pour into the bucket. Seal the lid. Place the trap at the farthest practical point from your main entry doors on the downwind side of your property. This week, buy 3 basil plants from any garden center, $4 to $6 total. Place one on each windowsill that your kitchen and food preparation area receives cross ventilation from. Place one near your most frequently used exterior door. Buy a small bunch of fresh lavender and hang it near your kitchen entry. Buy 1 spearmint or peppermint plant and place it near the exterior of your primary entry point. Replace the trap bait every 2 weeks in hot weather. Replace the lavender bunch whenever you cannot smell it from arm's length. Replace basil plants with new ones if they begin to bolt and become less aromatic. Maintain the organic waste source elimination as an ongoing practice rather than a one-time action. The total cost of this system, approximately $12 to $15 in initial setup. Annual cost to maintain, approximately $10 to $15 for plant replacement and trap bait materials. 1 afternoon of setup time. Ruth Esh has not bought a commercial fly product of any kind in 40 years of managing a working farm with open doors in summer. The system she uses was documented in public health literature in 1914 from older farmhouse practice that her community had been carrying forward since long before any commercial fly control product existed. I want to give you more specific detail on the breeding site elimination because this is the element most people underestimate, and because the science behind it is specific enough to be worth understanding before you apply it. A female housefly needs to find organic material that is moist, warm, and rich in nitrogen, specifically protein-rich material, to lay her eggs. The eggs hatch in 8 to 20 hours depending on temperature. The larvae, which are maggots, develop through 3 stages over 4 to 8 days in summer conditions. They then pupate for 4 to 6 days before emerging as adults. The full cycle from egg to adult fly capable of reproducing is as short as 10 to 14 days in hot weather. This means that a breeding site that produced adult flies last week is producing adult flies this week from eggs laid by those adults. A breeding site that you remove this week will stop producing adult flies in approximately 10 to 14 days, which is why fly populations noticeably decline within 2 weeks of source elimination rather than immediately. This delay is the reason commercial spray treatments appear to work. You spray, the adult flies die, and for the next week or two the population appears to stay low. What actually happened is that the spray killed the adults, and the next generation is still developing in the unchanged breeding site. When that generation emerges, the population recovers, usually within a week or two of the spray treatment, which is precisely the window that prompts the next spray purchase. The commercial product is selling you a recurring treatment cycle that the unchanged breeding site is guaranteeing will recur. Ruth's mother had a specific phrase for this. She said you can kill flies until your arm falls off and still have flies, unless you stop making new ones. Everything else is just numbers management. The specific sources that most consistently produce large fly populations near structures, in order of their typical contribution to the problem, are uncovered or poorly managed food waste and compost, standing manure in or near animal keeping areas, damp organic material under decks or porches where air circulation is poor, clogged gutters with accumulated decomposing leaf material, and food residue on outdoor surfaces including grills, pet feeding areas, and outdoor dining furniture. The last item on that list is one that surprises most people. A grill used regularly for summer cooking, even one kept moderately clean, produces drippings and charred organic residue that accumulates around the base, in the grease trap, and around the cooking grate that is highly attractive to flies. Ruth cleans her outdoor cooking equipment after every use, not primarily out of habit, but because she understands that every organic residue she leaves creates a small breeding site. I also want to tell you about the specific timing of fly management that makes a significant difference in how much work the system requires over the course of a summer. The housefly population in any given area follows a predictable seasonal curve in temperate climates. Adults overwinter in protected structures, in wall voids, in heating systems, in sheltered outdoor locations, and emerge in spring as temperatures warm. The population grows exponentially through spring and early summer, peaks in mid to late summer when temperatures and organic material availability are both highest, and declines in fall. Addressing breeding sites and establishing the trap and deterrent system before the population begins its exponential growth phase, meaning in April and early May rather than in July when the flies are already numerous, requires significantly less ongoing management than the same intervention made in peak season. Ruth sets her bucket trap in April every year and replaces the bait every 2 weeks throughout the season. By the time July arrives and the ambient population is at its annual peak, her trap has been running for 3 months and has removed a significant fraction of the adults that would otherwise have contributed to the local population. Starting in July, when the population is already at peak, is like trying to reduce the level of water in a bathtub by scooping it out with a cup while the tap is running. The trap is removing adults faster than a July startup would allow because the population is already fully established. Starting in April is like turning down the tap before the bathtub fills. This timing principle is documented in the 1914 Public Health Service Bulletin specifically, which recommended establishing trapping and baiting systems in April across all participating study farms, citing the exponential population dynamics as the reason early intervention produced results that late intervention could not match at equivalent trap density. Ruth's explanation of this principle was more direct. She said her mother told her to put the bucket out when you first think about flies, not when you first see them. By the time you first see them, you are already losing. There is one more element of Ruth's system that I saved for the end because it does not fit neatly into any of the 3 main categories, but that produces a measurable result on its own. She paints her outermost barn and storage structure doors a specific color. On the exterior surfaces that face away from the house, a light blue-gray, a color that the Pennsylvania Dutch farming tradition has used for outbuilding doors for generations. The traditional name for this color in the regional folk tradition is Haint's blue, a term that comes from an entirely different cultural tradition in the American South, but that appears in Pennsylvania German farming communities as well, under the name Himmelsblau, or Heaven's Blue. The folk explanation for this color tradition is various, but Ruth's explanation is practical. This color, which in the Pennsylvania Dutch tradition is mixed from a combination of local mineral pigments that produce a specific wavelength in the blue-gray range, deters flies from landing on and entering through the doorways. She does not know the science of why. She knows her grandmother used it and her mother used it and she has used it, and the barn doors have measurably fewer flies resting on them than the unpainted wood surfaces nearby. The science, which I looked into after my conversation with Ruth, does support a version of this observation. Certain blue wavelengths in the visible spectrum appear to some fly species as UV bright, which flies associate with open sky rather than surfaces to land on. The specific blue-gray color of the traditional Pennsylvania Dutch outbuilding paint falls in a wavelength range that research on fly landing preferences, conducted at agricultural universities studying ways to reduce fly entry into poultry houses, has identified as measurably less attractive to common houseflies than neutral or warm-toned surfaces. The science documented this in the 1990s. The Pennsylvania Dutch farming community had been applying the practical finding for at least 200 years before the research confirmed it. I do not know how to translate this into a practical recommendation for a modern house with vinyl siding or brick, and I will not pretend that painting your door a specific shade of blue-gray is a core fly management intervention. But it is one more example of the same pattern I find everywhere in this research. Traditional knowledge that works, operating on principles the science would eventually confirm, transmitted through communities that never stopped practicing it because they never needed the scientific confirmation to maintain their trust in what they observed. There is one practical variation of the bucket trap that Ruth showed me which I want to describe separately because it is the version most useful for people managing flies inside the home rather than around the exterior perimeter. For indoor use, the 5-gallon bucket scale is unnecessarily large. Ruth uses a standard quart mason jar, the same kind used for canning, with a paper cone inserted through a hole in the lid. The cone is made from a single sheet of standard paper rolled into a cone shape with a small opening at the narrow end, not hardware cloth because the small scale of the indoor trap does not require the same durability. The bait for the indoor jar trap is simpler than the outdoor bucket bait and is specifically designed to attract the smaller fly species, fruit flies and drain flies, that tend to enter the home rather than the large houseflies that mostly stay near breeding sites outdoors. 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar, 1 tablespoon of dish soap, and a small piece of overripe fruit. A slice of banana with brown spots works particularly well. Dropped into the bottom of the jar. The vinegar and the overripe fruit produce the fermentation odors that attract fruit flies specifically. The dish soap breaks the surface tension of the liquid at the bottom of the jar, so flies that land on the liquid surface are unable to escape and drown. The paper cone is inverted into the jar with the narrow end pointing downward, creating the same one-way entry that the outdoor trap uses, but at a scale appropriate for a mason jar sitting on a kitchen counter. The trap can be positioned near any area of fruit fly activity, near the fruit bowl, near the garbage can, near the sink drain, and will capture the local population within a few days. Ruth replaces the bait weekly or whenever the jar is full of trapped flies. She rinses and reuses the jar. The total cost per use is approximately 10 to 15 cents in vinegar and dish soap. She has not purchased a commercial fruit fly trap of any kind in 40 years. The apple cider vinegar trap for fruit flies is not obscure knowledge. It appears frequently in online home advice. What makes Ruth's version more effective than most descriptions of the same method is the paper cone. Most versions describe placing a jar of vinegar with or without a cover, relying on flies to find their way in and not find their way out. The cone, by funneling flies into the jar in a way that makes the exit path physically difficult to locate, dramatically increases capture rate compared to an uncovered jar. The one-way cone is the knowledge the internet description usually omits, and it is the knowledge that the 1890s Extension Service bulletins included as a standard feature of the trap design. It is the oldest and most effective element of the entire method, and it has been in the public domain literature for 130 years. Tell me in the comments what your fly situation looks like in summer, and whether you currently use any product for it. Tell me where you live and whether you have a compost set up, because the right approach for a city apartment is different from the right approach for a rural property, and I want to be specific about what works in each situation rather than giving advice that only applies to Holmes County farmhouses. Subscribe and hit the bell. Next week I am covering the Amish Natural Medicine Cabinet. The Flexner Report of 1910, funded by foundations holding significant pharmaceutical investments, resulted in the closure of most American botanical medicine schools within a decade. Before that report, every American household had working knowledge of the 12 most common medicinal plants. I found the 1908 edition of King's American Dispensatory in an archive in Berks County, Pennsylvania. What it contains will change how you look at what is growing in your own yard. Stay with me, there is more.